Hi guys, Joel from Jonesy's Auto Club, and in this video we're going to continue with our Cummins 6BT engine rebuild. As you can see, we've got all of our parts ready to go, our block is ready to go, so that video is coming up next. So here's our engine block. It's all cleaned up. Cylinder walls were honed. Hopefully you guys saw that in part 1. If you didn't, definitely go check that out. It's been added to a playlist. So we have cleaned everything up. Those cylinder walls look awesome. Everything is looking really good there. Now we cleaned the rest of the parts. Those are all of our main caps, our pistons, and this is a testament to the quality of these Cummins engines. This stuff literally looks brand new. Very, very little signs of wear. We had approximately 250, 225, I can't remember the exact number of miles on the Dodge donor vehicle, but you would expect to see more wear than we do. So check that out. I mean, there is no noticeable scoring or wear on any of the piston skirts. Everything looks really, really good. The camshaft is amazing. It looks really good. I mic'd all of the lobes. They are within specs, and the funny thing about it is that the lobe that shows the most signs of wear is the fuel pump lobe, which is right there. You can see that mark on it for the lift pump, but our cam lobes look really, really good. Whole camshaft looks great, our gears look good, so everything is checking out awesome. And so we are gonna go ahead and get the new rings swapped onto those pistons, and then after that we're gonna check bearing clearance and start banging these pistons into the block. So we've got our first piston, number 1, clamped in the vise just very gently so that it's not flopping around, and we're going to go ahead and get ready to install the new piston rings. And so I just go down through every single cylinder doing one at a time. It's kind of a repetitive motion, but it's good because you can kind of get into a rhythm. Now, special tool that you're going to want to buy if you are going to do this yourself is a piston ring pair of pliers. Looks like that. And then you also need to pay attention to the actual piston box itself. You can see that it's labeled 1, 2, 3 right there. This is the top ring, the second ring, and the oil control ring. So you want to make sure that you get those rings installed in the correct place. And the other thing you want to watch out for is to verify whether or not there is an up or a down to the ring itself. So I know the stock rings have a dot on them. Doesn't look like the first ring has anything. Let's see about the second ring. It does not have anything specifically, but there is a taper cut on it. Hopefully you guys can see that taper. Has a taper, a chamfer, has a chamfer cut right there, so we're going to need to make sure we pay attention to the way that's oriented. The first ring appears to not have any taper on it. So, when in doubt, reference the instructions that come with the rings. They kind of talk a little bit about how you assemble the different types of oil rings, as well as how the chamfers go, where the dots go, things like that. So here you can see it gives some good instructions on how those rings are oriented and which way is up. You certainly do not want to put them in backwards. So reference that and you'll be good to go. Now, one thing I'm going to do, since this is my first one, is I need to verify the oil, or I need to, since this is my first one, I need to do a double check a couple things. I need to verify my ring gap, and so I know that this is a standard bore because it is marked STD on the front of the piston. Hopefully you can see that. It's marked standard right there. So I know this is a standard bore. I ordered standard rings, but I don't want to leave anything to chance, so we're going to double check the ring gap, and I'm going to show you how to do that after I get these piston rings removed. So just work from the top down. Take them off and just set them in the order that they were removed so that you can reference them. So we've got that removed, so now we're going to move over to the actual engine block and we're going to check our ring gap. Okay guys, I'm going to show you how to check and verify your ring gap. So I'm going to take the top compression ring, set it down into our bore, slide it around like that, and I'm going to actually use the piston itself to square up that ring so that we can get an accurate measurement. So I'll slide it down in there like so, and that makes sure that that piston is, or that ring is completely squared up in there. Now, as per the Hastings, which is the manufacturer of the rings that I'm using, as per their specifications, for this approximate bore size, we need to have kind of a go, no-go gauge of minimum of 14 thousandths, maximum of 26 thousandths. So I've got those two feeler gauges ready to go. So I'm just going to make sure that the 14 thousandths feeler gauge fits in our gap, which it does, and make sure that the 26 thousandths does not fit in the gap, which it doesn't. So that means that our ring gap is correct as per the Hastings manufacturer. Now, a little trick in how to measure whether or not you have too much taper in the bore itself is to actually physically measure the ring gap of what you have at various spots inside the cylinder bore. So if you measure it at the bottom where in theory there's the least amount of wear, and you compare the difference between the ring gap on the bottom to the ring gap on the top where there's the most amount of wear, then you can determine how much taper you have. Now Hastings says that you should never have any more than 3/1000ths of an inch of taper for 1 inch of bore. Okay? Never ever to exceed more than 12 thousandths of an inch. So if you have a 4-inch bore, 3/1000ths, that's 12 thousandths of taper. At that point you would definitely have no choice but to bore the cylinder and run an oversized piston. So we confirmed our ring gap, and next we're going to go ahead and assemble all the pistons and start putting every single one of them into the corresponding cylinder. Okay guys, so here we're going to go ahead and install the rings. I'm just going to knock these old ones off. Like that. Okay, we're going to start with the oil control ring, the third ring, which is the bottom one. And you can hopefully see right here there's a gap in this spring. Okay, so we're going to orient that gap to the back of the piston here for now. We're going to get our oil control ring, and we're going to verify that there's not a specific top and bottom. If there isn't a specific top and bottom, this one actually has a part number that says the part number, and then the third ring, always put the part number up. That's kind of a general rule of thumb. Okay, and then we want to have this gap be opposite of where our spring gap was. So if you can see here, got our spring gap right here. I'll push that closed. I'm going to roll that all the way around so that it is on the opposite side of the piston as our gap right here. So then we're just going to very gently run this down. Making sure that it gets installed with the little spring expander. So then we just verify, you want to roll the ring around and verify that that spring expander is actually seated correctly inside this ring. So I'm not worried about where this gap is indexed on the piston yet. We're going to confirm that right before we put it in. But now we're just going to go ahead and install the remainder. I want to check and make sure that the rings are clean. They don't have any debris on them. This ring actually does have a up location. It has the one that has a little chamfer on it, so it confirmed with the old ring as well as the instructions that the chamfer goes up, and then also the corresponding part number goes up as well. So go ahead and get this guy installed very carefully. This is where these pliers really come in handy. And then onto the top ring. Again, part number goes up. I always just do a visual inspection, make sure there's nothing wrong with it before we expand it and put it on. Okay, so now we're 100%, rings are installed. Going to move on to the next piston. Now, since I've gotten all of the piston rings installed, we are ready to go ahead and put these pistons into the engine block. So if you look on the top of your piston, most of the time they will be labeled front. So we actually do have a label front, and then I've kept them all in order so I know that it went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 all the way back, and everything is good to go. So, which makes sense because this curve, this will go down in here like this. When the engine comes up, it'll all be indexed correctly. Now, some of you guys might be asking, well, why are you going to go ahead and put these pistons in before the crank? Well, it's pretty easy. If I do it this way, meaning pistons go in first, then the crankshaft, I don't have to worry about these rods coming in contact with the crank. So I can just put the pistons in, leave them up just a little bit. So basically flush with the top of the block, roll the block all the way over. I can then have really, really good access to install my bearing caps in here, so I can put all of my bearings in. Then I can set the crank in. So anyway, that's a couple steps down the road. Right now what we're going to do is I'm just going to show you how I lubricate everything before I put the pistons in. So first things first, before anybody criticizes me, no, this is not 80W90. This is kind of some regular engine oil, as well as some assembly lube and some break-in additive. So you want to make sure that you lubricate this pin really well. So I'm going to get that guy lubricated really good. Okay, and the next thing is you want to use, I like to coat the top of the cylinder all the way around like so with some assembly lube, and what will happen is that as the rings go down, it's going to squish all that assembly lube all the way down along that piston. So on top of that, I like to paint the skirt, the piston skirt, with some assembly lube. Okay, so piston skirt painted with assembly lube. And then I like to run some oil all the way around the top of that cylinder wall. take my hand and smear it all around. So that's good to go. Get that piston skirt really nice and coated with assembly lube. And yeah, you can already tell this is going to be messy. So then I like to cover those rings with oil. Kind of move them all around, make sure that you get oil in behind the rings. Make sure that it's all really, really well lubricated. Okay? Just like that. Some engine builders, they just like to put a little bit of engine oil on there. I like to have some assembly lube, fill those crosshatch patterns so that I know that that cylinder wall is lubricated really well. Now comes time for the moment of truth. This guy right here is a piston ring compressor. Highly, highly recommend that you buy one of these if you're doing an engine rebuild. They've really come down in price. This one is specifically for the standard Cummins bore, 102.1 millimeters, and it just makes life a lot easier. So I like to lubricate this up really well. Take some of that oil like so. And like I said, this is a messy process, but once you kind of get into a rhythm, it actually goes pretty quickly. So now the next step is going to be make sure everything is properly lubricated, which that piston looks great. It's got some assembly lube all over it. It's got some brake-in oil on it. It is ready to go. So we just need to identify front, which is like this, and index our piston rings. So as per the ring manufacturer, you want to alternate your ring openings, never within an inch of one another. So that means that the top ring gap right here needs to be more than an inch away from here. So I just stagger them. We have 3 rings, so you can kind of put them in thirds. Obviously I want this one to be opposite. I never line them directly up with the pin itself. So offset about there, never line them up with the skirt either. So we're going to put one ring right here. I'm going to put the other one over there. And then this guy for the oil control ring, we're going to index him right over there. So I kind of go on the corners of these pistons. So we got one right here, we got one over here, and then we have one over here. So they're all on opposite locations. So we are ready to install this guy. So we're going to go ahead and gently get him set down in there. And I'm going to let gravity kind of do the work here and get our oil ring started. I'm just kind of squeezing this stuff together by hand to get everything started down into our piston ring compressor like so. Next thing I like to do is reach underneath and get it down close, and that's all there is to that. A couple taps, piston slides right in, and now we're on to the next one.